next panel, as we transition, we know that for over a decade, the San Joaquin Valley has lacked the infrastructure to provide high quality and affordable internet access. And over the last 2 years of a global COVID-19 pandemic, the shift to working from home and remotely and educating remotely, we saw the gaps grow bigger in technology infrastructure and further exacerbate the issues of the digital divide, impacting our families in the San Joaquin Valley and our students and the achievement gaps as well. So our next presentation will continue to outline the significant policy opportunities to close the digital divide here in the San Joaquin Valley. And it's my honor to pass it over to Gabriela Sandoval to lead this conversation for us. Gabriela, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sergio. And thank you to the San Joaquin Valley Health Fund for hosting this very important event and allowing us the opportunity to talk a little bit about this very important topic, the digital divide. Welcome, audience members. We are very grateful that you are here joining us today. My name is Gabriela Sandoval. I use the pronouns she and they, and I serve as Director of Race and Equity Policy for TURN, the Utility Reform Network. I am coming to you today from unceded Tongva land in Southern California, and I have 3 of my brilliant colleagues here with me today to as we talk about getting connected, a conversation on opportunities to bridge the digital divide in the San Joaquin Valley and beyond. So I am going to ask, I'll just call on you all to introduce yourselves one at a time, and please provide your name, your work identity, where you're coming to us from, the name of your organization, what your organization does, and how you work to advance digital inclusion. Ashley, I'll go ahead and start with you.
Thank you, Gabriela. Good afternoon, everybody, and happy Pride. Thank you to Equity on the Mall for having me here today. I'm honored to participate with my distinguished panelists to discuss opportunities to bridge the digital divide. My name is Ashley Salas. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am a telecommunications regulatory and policy attorney with TURN, the Utility Reform Network. TURN advocates at multiple forums, including the California Public Utilities Commission, the CPUC, the California State Legislature, and the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, for safe, affordable, and reliable utility services, including wireline and wireless voice and broadband services. And I look forward to talking more with the panelists about how what opportunities are available to bridge the digital divide.
Thank you, Ashley. Jorge?
Hi, everybody. My name is Jorge Rivera. I use the pronouns he, him, his. I'm coming to this panel from unceded Tongva land in Southern California, specifically in the San Gabriel Valley. I am the executive co-director with the People's Resource Center. The People's Resource Center is a worker self-directed nonprofit that supports BIPOC communities through processes of workshops, training, and advocacy to help create safe, healing, and connected spaces. And we come to this work because we're focused in on advocacy and connection and making sure that our communities are connected. And we know that internet is vital for that connection. I think COVID has highlighted that. So that's how we come into this work to bridge the divide.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paulina Chavez. I am here also in unceded Tongva land in Los Angeles. But actually, I'm originally from Bakersfield, so I'm super excited to be here, and thank you to Equity on the Mall for having me. I am Senior Director of Programs and Special Projects at Everyone On. We are a national nonprofit working to unlock opportunity, economic and social opportunity by connecting people to the internet, providing low-cost devices, and also digital skills training to both community and organizations. So super excited to be here with you all and these fellow panelists to talk about bridging the digital divide.
Great. Well, I'm going to start with you, Paulina. Can you provide just a broad overview of this particular historical moment that we happen to be in right now? I think that we're both nationally and as a state, we are at a moment where what is possible now wasn't probably possible 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or even 3 years ago. So would you just provide a little bit of context to get us started?
Sure. Yes. So honestly, I think personally, I think the pandemic really kind of jump started this, but this work has been going on for years or decades, even as you mentioned. One of the big things we'd be remiss if we didn't mention is the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act that was just signed in November. It allocates $65 billion to broadband efforts, which is huge. And out of that pot of money, I'd like to specifically highlight the BEAD program, which is the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Program, which I'm hopeful a lot of folks here will look to apply because it provides money directly to organizations on the ground to actually help provide connection. So the infrastructure piece also, but the adoption piece, I think that's what something often is really missed. Yes, we need the infrastructure and the technology, middle mile, last mile. We'll probably get into that. But it's also about getting people connected, providing them the devices to access the internet, and also the digital skills so that they can really leverage it. And that's something that we're focusing on here at Everyone On. And that's just kind of, broad at a federal level. And here in California, similarly, we're always leading the way, I like to say, and Governor Newsom also made an investment, $6 billion that he signed last year through SB 156 to similarly provide support for the infrastructure and adoption piece as well. So to your point, what wasn't possible 10, 5, 3 years ago, we're really at a moment where there's so much opportunity for coalition building. I've been invited to so many coalitions and, organizations that just really want to step up and step into the space, either out of necessity due to the pandemic, most often is what I'm seeing, or because, that's just they see that their community needs this. And so they want to be able to inform themselves and have the right tools to support. So that's one. And then again, kind of back to the funding piece, there'll be money. Organizations can apply for money and actually build their own capacity to help bridge this problem, both at local, state, federal level. And organizations like Everyone On, Turn, People Resource, I'm sure we're all willing to step up and help these organizations who might not really know what the next steps are. So
Thank you, Paulina.
Mhm.
You already began to mention things like middle mile and last mile, and these, along with some of the acronyms that Ashley mentioned earlier, like the CPUC and the FCC. A lot of times, these technical terms kind of turn people off or make them feel like, oh, I don't know what this means. I don't know how to get involved. And so, Ashley, would you mind kind of demystifying a little bit, what does the CPUC do? What does the FCC do with respect to the digital divide? And what are some of the ways you think, what are some of the opportunities at those levels?
Absolutely. Thank you, Gabriella. So I think Paulina started laying the foundation already for what these agencies do. So the California Public Utilities Commission, the CPUC, and I'll try to spell out each of the acronyms because I know it's not it's alphabet soup, as one of the panelists mentioned earlier. The California Public Utilities Commission is a California agency that regulates utilities. So that's going to be your energy and gas utilities, your water utilities, or some of them at least, and your communications utilities like phone services and broadband services. The FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, is a federal agency. So you have the state and the feds, federal agencies, and the FCC regulates communications providers like AT&T and Frontier, Comcast on phone services and on broadband services. So we have work going on at both the state and the federal level to help bridge the digital divide. And as Paulina was mentioned earlier, there's a lot of work going on at both of them. So one of them that's going to be happening at both the state and the federal level, and getting involved with those is going to be around affordable services. So there's two public purpose programs that help provide affordable services. There's the California Lifeline program and the Federal Affordable Connectivity Program. These programs provide up to $25.50 per month and $30 per month, respectively. And these programs can be combined to support one service. However, we encourage people to use one discount on like a wireless service and one discount on a wireline service to help it, to broaden the reach of these discounts and programs. So once again, that's the California Lifeline program and the Affordable Connectivity Program. That's to get affordable services. Now, affordable services doesn't mean anything if you don't have a device to use on those services. So in California, the wireless lifeline providers generally provide a mobile phone at no cost to the residents. Of course, you can bring your own mobile device if you have one, but you can also get one at no cost through many of the wireless lifeline providers in California. The Affordable Connectivity Program also provides a stipend of up to $100 for laptops and other devices to help connect to the internet. And one thing that's great about the Affordable Connectivity Program is that it provides grants to CBOs to do education and outreach about the ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program. Now, having affordable services and devices doesn't mean anything if folks do not feel comfortable using the internet. So as Paulina started to mention, there's digital literacy trainings, there's adoption funding available. In California, the California Public Utilities Commission provides grants to CBOs and other organizations to provide digital literacy training through the California Advanced Services Fund, the CASF adoption account. And of course, a lot of these issues to address the digital divide, it's not going to happen even if we have this historic funding and attention on these issues if the agencies do not hear from the people that are being affected. So there are ways to be heard at the California Public Utilities Commission and at the Federal Communications Commission on these issues, regardless of whether there's adequate infrastructure in your communities, affordability of utility services, including broadband services, and addressing environmental justice and digital discrimination. Mm-hmm. You can file comments, whether it's informal or formal comments at both agencies. You can write letters to the commissioners or even to your state representatives, and you can speak. I know TURN does a lot of organizing to have people speak at California Public Utilities Commission workshops, at public participation hearings, and even at voting meetings to have their voices heard. So I will stop there and I'll answer any questions that anyone has about anything that I just mentioned, because I know it was a lot.
Thank you, Ashley. So we're getting to the meat of some of this, right? Paulina talked about funding. Ashley talked about discount programs. There's all these different agencies involved. So before I turn it over to Jorge, I do want to just encourage folks, if you have questions, if you want to learn more about something specific that one of our speakers shared, please do put your questions in the comments so that we, can get to those questions in a little bit. So finally, Jorge, tell us what's happening on the ground. What kinds of opportunities exist for individuals and organizers to bring the power of the people to bear on closing the digital divide?
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the question. Thanks for the great panelists and the discussion. It's very appreciated, very welcomed. I think Ashley made a great segue into what I want to talk about as far as what's happening on the ground. I am, and we are traditional community organizers. And I think one of the strongest tools that we have as organizers, as community is the power of our story. And I think one of the initial things that we realized that we had to do is to gather stories, gather information, learn about the experiences. And some of these were highlighted during the COVID pandemic, as we saw in the news, with children not being able to connect to Wi-Fi to be able to get their homework done or to attend classes. people not being able to have telehealth consultations, the lack of connectivity preventing people from finding jobs and services that were desperately needed during the height of the pandemic. And we're still in the pandemic technically, and so people are still having these barriers to connectivity, to information, to education, to health, and all of these different access points. And we were hearing these sort of like from a tertiary perspective from the news. And I think one of the first things that we do as organizers is we need to get into the community and hear directly from the people that are mostly impacted, so that we can fully understand the breadth of what is happening and to the people's lives, how they're being impacted, how they're being able to live healthy and connected lives are being influenced by either their lack of connectivity, their inability to connect because of a lack of a device. What are the barriers and what are the obstacles that actually keep people from being connected to people, to loved ones, to services, to resources, to all of these different things, right? And so that's the first step. And just for disclosure, like the People's Resource Center, we're about 6 months deep into the digital equity work. And as was mentioned earlier, there's a lot for us to wrap our heads around when we're talking about building out the infrastructure so that people can connect. And I think in order for people and community folks to really get engaged and to really become leaders and advocates and activists in bridging this digital divide, we need to break that down for them to really understand and comprehend, because I consider myself an educated individual, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around half mile and last mile and this type of cable and that kind of cable and fiber optics and DSL and all of what it entails when we're talking about building it out. Because it's not as easy as saying, okay, we're going to get this community connected if there's nothing already built to get them connected.
Mhm.
And then so trying to translate that to a community member who hasn't had any connectivity and has no concept of how this might happen or work out for them, because I don't have any concept of how it works out. So how am I going to be able to educate and inform them to do it? So I think beginning stages is we really need to digest and translate all of this information, and so that it's palatable and people can actually take it in and understand why they are not connected or why they are having such a poor connection to the internet. And then once they understand that and they're able to really like chew on that and digest it, I think then we can really activate community to be more involved as advocates, to be able to speak to their elected officials, to speak to the representatives that make the decisions, right? And then to be able to stand up to these internet service providers who want to hoard the money that is becoming available to them and not really invest in the communities that are most in need. They just invest in the communities that are going to be most profitable for them.
Mhm.
So I think on the ground, I think that's where we're at, is like we're trying to collect stories, understand what's going on, so that we can then start to take the next phase and start to inform and educate community about what's happening politically, financially, and how they can get involved. I'll stop there.
That's great, Jorge. I actually, two questions come to mind based on what you just shared with us, Jorge. And I want to kind of open it up, whoever wants to jump in here. So two things. One is, Jorge, you mentioned, well, actually all three of you have mentioned now at this point, the fact that COVID really motivated people to become involved in broadband equity work. But it also kind of forced people to become aware of the significance of, digital inclusion, having access, like Jorge said, for education, for telehealth, for all sorts of different reasons. And, now that kids have gone back to schooling in person and, mask mandates have been lifted. My first question to you all is, how do we maintain that momentum? And then kind of like the flip side of that, or related to that, is given also how difficult, and there have been a couple comments in the comments about, the language is tough, like it's hard. There are these barriers, these technical barriers, right? So how do we inspire people, not just to keep the momentum going, but even folks who, who might feel like their voice doesn't matter? Like, how do we inspire them to overcome those barriers to help us get to the next place?
I'll jump in here as the organizer. Like we have to on some level, like respectfully and humbly and gently agitate. It's I always say there's no solution if there's no problem. And so if we don't identify the problem or help others see that there is a problem, then there's going to be no incentive or motivation to find a solution to that problem. And unfortunately, as having done community organizing for so long and working in low income or poverty stricken communities, there's almost a normalcy to their living that they just accept, that because maybe they're at a certain income level, they can't afford, and that they can't afford this thing, this utility, this service, and it's normal, and it's like, oh well, we just can't afford it. When it's not a luxury anymore. I think that the COVID pandemic also highlighted that this is a necessity. This should be viewed and described as a utility, just the way our gas and our electric is described, and it's held up at that level. And so we need to communicate to the California Public Utilities Commission that this is a utility, that they need to regulate, that they need to ensure that everybody has access to, and not just access, but that it's affordable and that it's reliable and quality service, right? Because we hear stories of the internet service providers throttling down the actual speeds of internet that people have connection to. So they have control and can manipulate how quickly somebody uploads or downloads information from the internet. And then we hear about price discrimination, about how some communities are actually getting charged less for the same program and the same service than other communities. And so if as a community member, you're not aware that the reason why you can't get internet is because it's too expensive, or because they're not making it available, or because they're not building out that infrastructure in your community, that, in layman's terms, that upsets people. And when people get upset, that might help them to be motivated and incentivized to get more involved or to learn more as to why these big companies might be preventing them from gaining access when they see other communities having access. So I think agitation, information, and education is one way to get them to get more involved.
If I could jump in, I just really want to highlight what Jorge said during his initial comments about the storytelling. It's so key. I've been doing this work at least since 2016, if not a little bit longer. And there have always been people who are unconnected and needed to be online. If not, I think it really, dug into people's heart when they saw the kids. I know there was that picture of, I think it was in Salinas, 2 little girls outside the Taco Bell, right? I remember I reached out. I was like, I can provide some support, and it didn't work out, but that's what really kind of like, I think, brought people's attention to it. But there have always been seniors who needed telehealth. There have always been people who needed to apply to jobs online. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you all. You can no longer walk into, most places around my neighborhood and ask for a paper application. They will point you to their website and say, fill it out there. So, outside of the pandemic, there's always been people who needed to get connected to the internet. And so, it's long been a need and not necessarily a luxury. So I wanted to highlight the storytelling part is so important, because there will always be these stories that we need to be able to lift up to the CPUC, to the FCC, to all of these policymakers, to show them the importance of continuing to focus on this issue once once general interest is no longer kind of, that the spotlight is no longer on the digital divide. So I want to highlight that. And then to the affordability piece, it's so true, and it's that relevancy factor. I don't think I mentioned it, but if the internet is relevant to them, in either for job, schooling, telehealth, whatever the case is, people will actually make the sacrifice to keep internet at really high price points. I'd be remiss. My team would be remiss or upset if I didn't mention. We actually recently did a national research study that showed that people. Low-income folks under $50,000 or less, who traditionally pay between 60 to 70. That's like the average number. People pay a lot more. Some people pay a little bit less. Even if it's a burden on their budget, if it's relevant to them, they will keep it. They will make it work. You will see folks go without food sometimes, or without other utilities because their kids need it, or they need it to apply to jobs or whatnot. So the affordability piece is also super important, because affordable means different things to everyone, right? And so everybody needs to leverage programs like the ones Ashley mentioned, the California Lifeline program, the Affordable Connectivity Program, and organizations need to be ready to step up and provide that support to community, because unfortunately it is still a very onerous process to sign someone up for these subsidies to apply to their bills. So just wanted to highlight those few items in terms of how do we keep the pressure on.
And then if I can add to that as well, I think Jorge and Paulina and Gabriela, you all mentioned that, this digital divide, it predates the pandemic by a lot. It's used other terms before, like the homework gap, but it's been there. We know it's there. And there are reports and studies that show that some of the largest communication service providers do not deploy communications infrastructure to low-income communities and communities of color. Or if they do, they don't adequately maintain those infrastructure. So if it rains, you're out of service. And, it's when asked, these providers will actually say that low-income folks don't want access to the internet. So this is why it's so important for the people who are affected by this to be heard, to have their stories heard, to maintain this momentum. And I know that the technical terminology can become onerous, but really plain English is just fine, or plain language. It doesn't have to be English. Plain language is fine. As Paulina mentioned and Jorge referred to, the girls in Salinas, they were just living their lives, right? And got picked up by the news. That was plain language and a photo, which goes a long way also, right? Mm-hmm. So just having your stories heard, even if you don't know the technical terms, even if you don't know the technology that goes behind why it is you're having difficulty having services, or why you're paying such high amounts, just speaking your truth, that with everybody else speaking their truth will help continue this work. Because these agencies, the California Public Utilities Commission, the Federal Communications Commission, they cannot act if they don't hear from us. They're just hearing from the providers saying that low-income folks don't want these services.
Thank you. Okay, so I want to ask a question that is of particular relevance to the San Joaquin Valley. And this is a question that gets raised a lot, especially when we begin to talk about equitable access. Can someone talk a little bit about the difference between being unserved and being underserved, and kind of how those two different things are important, how they're related to the San Joaquin Valley in particular, and maybe the San Joaquin Valley in relation to other parts of the state?
So I can speak to that here, and I want to be clear about the language here, because unserved and underserved refers to a lot of different things. In this context, though, it's unserved and underserved by broadband services. And the way that the California Public Utilities Commission and the Federal Communications Commission looks at this is they're looking at a map. And this map is divided by census blocks. So the US Census that goes around every 10 years, they divide the nation into census blocks. They're different sizes, but they're just looking at these bounded areas that they have set aside for the census. Now, the California Public Utilities Commission and the Federal Communications Commission takes a look at those census blocks. And they say, or at least they did, this is changing now, they would say if one household, if one location in that census block can receive broadband services at whatever speeds, that census block and everyone in it is considered served. Now we know that's not right because a census block can have thousands of people living there, hundreds of people living there. Just because one person receives services doesn't mean the rest of the people that are there have access to affordable and reliable communication services, right? So the FCC and the CPUC, they're both looking at how to revisit how they consider what is unserved and underserved by broadband services. Related to that, underserved by broadband services means there are some services for broadband, at least one household in that census block can receive services, but it's not at that higher speed. It's at a lower speed. So that's considered underserved by broadband services.
May I ask a question to
course.
Ashley or Paulina? So what are reasonable minimum speeds? So that, like, because when you purchase a plan, or when people purchase a plan, they're like, oh, this much megabytes download and this much upload. What's a good speed?
So thank you, Jorge, for the question. That's a really good question. So it really depends on what you're using the services for. If you want to, and this is highly debated as to what is minimum. So I will just give you a general answer, and really it's gonna depend. So if you're just looking at websites online that are just static websites, they're not changing, there's no graphics, there's no videos, you might not need higher speed services. But if you're trying to stream like live events like this one, or participate in a Zoom call where you have to stream the video download and upload your video and voice at the same time, you're going to need higher speed services for download and upload. But addition to speed, so a lot of folks focus on speed. There's more than speed. There's jitter, there's latency, there's lag, which, for here, if you want a clear video going all the way through, or you want your voice to be clear all the way through, you're going to need to pay attention to those as well. Because if you have lag and you're hearing me, what I'm saying, like 2 seconds after what I'm saying, and it's not following my lips, it's going to distort your ability to interact, right? Same thing with latency or jitter. If the video is coming in all choppy, or we don't get snow anymore like we did on the old TVs, but it's where it's the grid is not coming in right, it doesn't show properly, or if it's constantly stopping and starting, stopping and stopping, you don't have the service quality necessary to adequately use your broadband services.
Yeah.
So basically, for all the really important things in life, like education, telehealth, work meetings,
Exactly.
you need good quality internet for all that. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I just want to make a plug. If you want to help the FCC find better data on broadband, they have a FCC test speed test app you can download on both iOS and Android. I have it. I've had it for about almost 6 months now. And it's so fascinating to exactly see what Ashley was talking about, the lag, the latency, the jitter, and, are you getting the speeds that your internet service provider is actually telling you that they're getting? I'm supposed to be getting 200 megabytes per second on my internet and how much I pay, but that's not what I'm getting according to the speed app, right? And so that's really informational for me, just as a professional working remotely. But the FCC is also getting this data, and so it's really helpful to be able to show that.
And if I can add to that too, so the FCC has their app that they use. The CPUC has Cal Speed Test, so you can use that also. And also, Paulina, you just touched on a topic that I wanted to raise and I forgot to mention earlier, that people, and I think Jorge spoke about this briefly, is that people are paying for services they're not receiving. Mm-hmm. So if you're running the Cal Speed Test or other speed tests and you're seeing that you're supposed to be getting 200 megabytes per second download and upload speed, and you're only getting 50, that's a problem, right? Mm-hmm. You're paying for something that you're not receiving. And that's a problem that's going on throughout the nation, not only here in California.
Thank you. And Ashley and Paulina, if you all wouldn't mind dropping the moderators the links to those speed tests so that they can share with the audience, because this is a really simple way for folks to get involved, right? Like, let's help the state and federal agencies responsible for reliable service actually do their job, right? So that's just like one very basic thing that we can do. So I really want to open it up to questions and comments from the audience. If folks want to drop their questions, that would be really great, into the comment box, into the chat box. In the meantime, I do have a question that came into us, and I think this is a really important question. What is your opinion, and this is for anyone who wants to take it, what is your opinion about utility bill forgiveness programs by state and local governments? Do you think these are effective and executed in a way to help community residents?
I can get started on this one. I think the hard thing with a lot of these programs is that people just don't know. And a lot of times, if you don't know what you're asking for, and this is where terminology comes in specifically, then the utility isn't going to give it, right? You have to be clear with the utility that you want these forgiveness programs, or you want to participate in them, or you want to participate in sorry, I'm forgetting the word for it, but where you pay a certain amount each month going forward until you pay off the debt. You have to ask for these specific programs, and if you don't know about them, it's hard to ask for them. So it's I think they have good potential to help folks, but I think we're having problems with getting the information out there. And I know Gabriela has been working with a lot of organizations to get that information out there. So this is a good question. I don't know if she wants to speak more on that, but I imagine Paulina and Jorge's organizations have been working on these issues too.
I mean, I would just say, as an organization who works with organizations on the ground, that's exactly what we want to do. We want to bring awareness to these programs that are available for folks to take advantage of, because to Ashley's point, people just don't know about them. The Affordable Connectivity Program, for example, is a relatively new program. It's the it's the next iteration of what was previously known as the Emergency Broadband Benefit. And I think I was looking at an article just yesterday that currently only 1 out of 5 people across the entire country who are eligible for the Affordable Connectivity Program are signed up for it. And in California, I think we're leading the pack, but it's only at like 20% or something like that of eligible Californians who could take advantage of this $30 subsidy are either aware of it or signing up for it. And that was something we saw in our research as well. People just don't know because they go to, or they don't trust internet service providers, or they don't trust government even sometimes to be able to, give out that information. And so they look to organizations like Jorge's or Turn or Everyone On to be the leader. So we need all the organizations represented here in the audience to, be willing to partner and educate yourselves on what's available so you can get that information to community.
Okay. There's another question in the chat. I do want to just, since Ashley mentioned me in her response, I do want to just jump in briefly and say that, in the energy utility space, we know how much people owe the utility companies. But in the broadband provider space, we don't know. The broadband providers are not required to share data about how much money is owed by people, by their customers. So part of solving a problem, as Jorge mentioned earlier, is, knowing that there is a problem to begin with, accepting that there is a problem. And so without that information, we can't really move forward. And so I just want to say that Turn has been working to find ways to compel these companies to share that information so that we can actually find a way to forgive people's debt, because we do know that the last few years have been really tough economically for lots of people, probably most people. And so we want to try to address that. So now on to Adria Tinnan's question. As consumer advocates, How can we address this issue of paying for something you're not getting? Is there a state or a federal complaint process that's in place to handle this issue? Great
So I can start answering that question. So for complaints, I mean, it's really up to you how much energy you want to put forward into this, but you can complain at every possible agency that you want to. So at the California Public Utilities Commission, you can do an informal or formal complaint there. At the federal level, you can do the same thing at the Federal Communications Commission. You can also try at the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, since they are providing a service that, or they're charging you for a service that they are not providing, right? So you have issues about not getting the services that you're supposed to be paying for. So you can, I would suggest trying to work with the utility first to see, and then escalating from there as needed. And with any of these agencies that you file a complaint with, a lot of them will have a public advisor, and you can talk with them and ask them, who else should I be sending this complaint to?
Yeah, I'd like to add to all of that great information that the sort of like the advocate spin would be complain to your representatives, complain to your city representatives, complain to your state representatives, complain to your federal national representatives, complain to them, because the California Public Utilities Commission is driven by nominated commissioners from the governor of the state of California. So the governor can always say, hey, commission, you got to do this, or you need to start doing some of this, or the elected state representatives then put pressure on, so just complain and share your story to your state and local representatives. I shared or a document link was shared in the chat for a survey that we are trying to do, because as Gabriela mentioned, we've asked the internet service providers to share with us their data, and they won't. And so it's very difficult for us to be able to analyze what they're offering, who they're offering it to, how much they're charging, comparatively speaking, what communities is getting what, who's paying that. So we have no information to go off of, which is why we really need to hear from people about what you're paying, what your quality is like, where do you live, because all of this information is going to help us paint a picture to all of these elected officials or state representatives to make changes and to better regulate these internet service providers. So go to the link, share that out. We have posts on our social media pages with QR codes to that same link and survey. So share it out. We need to collect as much information as possible to really get this ramped up.
Thank you, Jorge. Okay, there was another great question that came in, and of course I just scrolled past it. Give me 1 second. Again, back to the San Joaquin Valley. What is your opinion about broadband upgrades in the San Joaquin Valley? What are special hurdles in your experience that we're experiencing in the San Joaquin Valley?
So I can speak generally to this. It won't be specific to the San Joaquin Valley, but a lot of what we're seeing throughout the state and nationwide is that, okay, well, let me back up real quick on vocabulary. So Paulina mentioned earlier middle mile and last mile. So the way I think of these, think of a tree. So if you think of the trunk of the tree, that is the general internet services, people who are connected. You need then a thick branch that is going to be your middle mile services, and then a twig that's going to be your last mile service to get to the leaf. Okay, so if you don't have the twig to get to the leaf, which is your house that is connected, then it doesn't matter that there's a branch there. Your leaf won't be connected, right? You won't have connection at home. If you don't have that branch, there's nothing for the twig to go on, and your leaf can't go on. If you want broadband at home, you need that thick branch, which is your middle mile, and you need that twig, which is your last mile, so you can have that leaf, your connected home. Okay, so that's the analogy that I use. I like you can see my plants behind me. I like leaves. I like plants. So that's the analogy I'm going with. So when I talk about middle mile, think of the thick branch. When I talk about last mile, think of the twig, and at home connection, it's your leaf. Okay. So what we're seeing throughout the state and nationwide is that there's a lot of communities, especially low income and communities of color, that don't have last mile. There's no twigs there, so you can't get the leaf. You can't get the at-home broadband services, okay? And I'm talking about wireline services. You might be able to get mobile services, but for at-home wireline services, which is going to be the most reliable, you're not going to have that because there's no twig. There's no last mile services. And a lot of these communities, though, there's not even middle mile services. That branch is not even there. So you can't put a twig where there's no branch to connect it. So what we're seeing throughout the state and throughout the nation right now is that the state and the nation and other states are trying to be strategic about where to fund state-owned middle mile services, where the state can put, the state would run it, the state would own it, as opposed to internet service providers, so that it's more equal, right? So you can't get these arguments from the providers that say, oh, well, low income folks don't want it, so we're not going to put the branch, we're not going to put the twig. The state is going to say, there's a community here, we need leaves, so we're going to put this branch down, and then we're going to work on the twigs afterwards. So that's what we're looking for here. So that's what we're looking for throughout California and throughout the nation, about strategies to deploy the middle mile and last mile services.
Thanks, Ashley. Does anybody else want to add anything to that?
I was like, that's a perfect analogy. I'm going to start using that, Ashley, because you said it it makes so much sense. But, as I mentioned, I'm originally from Bakersfield, so I'm familiar with the challenge. Well, Bakersfield's a little bit south, but like it's the challenges of the San Joaquin Valley, Central Valley, of like the communities are all really far apart. And that's one of the main arguments, right? Like it doesn't make sense for us to invest because everyone's so far apart and there's so few people. And I think of my friends who live in Firebaugh or Porterville, and like they also need all these services and resources that we were talking about, telehealth, especially, think about it pulls in so many other societal ills. There's a doctor shortage, there's the schooling shortage, there's all these other shortages that internet can help, maybe not supersede or solve, but it can definitely help bridge that gap in the meantime. And so this middle mile and last mile work is really, really important. And I think I saw an adjacent question in the chat that yes, the state is currently trying to figure out how to do this middle mile and last mile work, as Ashley mentioned. If you haven't already, consider engaging your regional broadband consortium. So, the state of California has this very unique program through the California Public Utilities Commission called the Regional Broadband Consortia, which their part of their job is to help bring in funding for some of this infrastructure work. And given all the investment that I mentioned at the top of the hour for both federal and state funding, right now is the time to engage and speak up and tell those stories of which communities don't currently have the twig, the branch, to the tree trunk. So that's what I wanted to add.
So, and just on that note, Eduardo Gonzalez, who was a part of this panel last year at Equity on the Mall, is the manager of the Fresno-based San Joaquin Valley Regional Consortium. So folks might remember him. He's very, accessible. Their office does really fantastic work at every level, right? From the CPUC all the way down to digital literacy. So very important work. We're coming up on the hour here, and there is one last question that was asked that I think is a really fantastic question. And I don't think we often have an opportunity to talk about this. So I want to close with this last question. Why did you get involved in this work, and what fuels you to continue?
I guess I can start. I came upon this work very serendipitously. our CEO, Norma Fernandez, is a longtime mentor of mine. And when I was trying to figure out next steps after leaving a previous job where I was doing higher education access, she approached me saying that she had been promoted from a community, kind of like an advocate role, like a Los Angeles regional manager at the time, to really work within community and get people connected to the internet. And she felt that with my experience in community, both in the Central Valley and Los Angeles, I would be a really great role. And so I kind of just stumbled upon it. Didn't really think about the digital divide, although I had seen it, I had experienced it. I remember going to the library as a student because we didn't have internet at home. So that's just kind of how I happened to end up in this space. But I continue to do this work because I just see how it's such a lifeline. I don't, pardon the program pun, but like it's such a lifeline to everything we need today in society. You know, I think of my dad who is learning Facebook on his phone, and I'm having to teach him how to engage with it in a safe manner so he doesn't get scammed out of his money or something like that, right? I think of the immigrant mother that I've helped in Los Angeles, who she used to, and this was pre-pandemic, so this was like in 2017. I remember she told me a story of she had two daughters who were super engaged in school, so they were doing a lot of extracurricular activities, so they wouldn't get home until about 6 o'clock. They didn't have internet at home though, so what they would do is just take the metro, the bus here in Los Angeles, and just go from McDonald's to Starbucks to whatever place had Wi-Fi. They'd buy like $1 soda so that they wouldn't get kicked out. And until that limit went, then, you know, that's how they moved. And on a nightly basis, she wouldn't get home until 11, almost midnight every night, so her daughters could do their schoolwork at home. Had the opportunity to do their schoolwork. And once we helped her connect to a low-cost internet offer, she was so elated because, granted, the speeds weren't that great, but the price was right for her at the time. And it allowed her and her daughters to be safe at home, to be able to do that work, right? And so just hearing those stories, as Jorge mentioned, the stories are so powerful. And that's kind of what continues to drive my work today.
So I can go next. So I did not think when I was in law school that I would get into the utility realm. I did not. I wanted to get into administrative law, which is law that practices in front of an agency, whether it's a state agency like the California Utilities Commission or a federal agency like the Federal Communications Commission. Because to me, that agency work, that administrative law, that's where the meat is. That's where you can have a lot of widespread rippling effects that, and especially for work here in front of the state commission, it affects not only California, but I think as Paulina mentioned earlier, a lot of other places look to California. So we're the trendsetters here, right? So it really does have a long reaching effect. But for me, I thought I was going to be working in front of the Department of Interior because I really like endangered species, and they're the ones that administer the Endangered Species Act. But when I got out of law school, it wasn't the case. It wasn't meant to be at that time. And so I started my own practice as a solo attorney and became what my friend refers to as a pop-up attorney, or a toaster attorney, excuse me. You just take whatever pops up. And so one of the clients that came to me, she came to me with a water shutoff. She didn't understand what was happening. The water, she just tried the water that morning and the water didn't run. And she had paid her bill. She actually showed me the checks that she paid her bill. What happened was that she had tried to use the water department's online bill pay service, and she had a typo in her bank account number. And instead of like other online bill pays where if you have a typo, it kicks it back immediately, the water department accepted it. But because of the typo, they said, oh, we can't get your money. So they charged her a bounce check fee. Now, this was the first time she had tried to use the online bill pay service. And so she was monitoring her account, didn't see it was taken out of her bank account. So she went to the water department and paid her bill. Didn't know this bounce check was on there. This happened a second month. She tried it the next month to pay her water bill online. A second typo, same thing, second bounce check fee. She was monitoring the account. Nothing happened. She walked over to the water department, paid her bill. So she's paid her water bill for these months. But now she has 2 bounce check fees that she's not aware of. And with 2 unpaid bounce check fees, the water department shuts off your water and requires that you pay, I think it was a $300 deposit in order for them to reinstate your water, plus you have to pay the reinstatement fee. So I was able to argue on her behalf as an advocate, not even as an attorney, that this was beyond ridiculous, that 2 typos should not result in this, especially when consumers have come to expect that if you have a typo in your bank account, it'll get kicked back immediately and not accepted. So based on that, we had to escalate, but we were able to get her water reinstated and all those fees waived. And so that turned my attention to utilities and to water, to energy is its own whole ball of wax that is way above my head, but water and communication services, and that's and these things that you would think would not be a problem, they're still problems. And so that's what keeps me motivated, and that's what keeps me fueled and involved in this arena.
Yeah. Well, I know we're running out of time, so I'll be quick with mine. I guess my story and why I'm involved is very analogous to Plato's allegory of the cave. If you've read that story, then you understand. I feel I didn't go to school for this. I didn't study for this. I didn't know I'd end up here. I graduated college and got into foster care, and I worked with children with disabilities and families with disabilities in foster care. And I got so disillusioned after 5 years because I just saw that what I was doing it didn't feel like it was helping. And there was this revolving door and kids constantly coming into foster care. And I didn't feel like I was helping any. So I left social work completely. And many years later, it was an organizer that brought me in and showed me what they were doing. They were working and organizing around tenants' rights and housing. They taught me about systems of oppression. I learned about government. I learned about politics. I learned about everything that I know today in community organizing. I did not learn in school. I learned through another organizer. And as I woke up, or as I broke free from my chains, so to speak, and I saw what was really happening, I saw about capitalism and oppression and systems of power, and how our folks are kept down and struggling constantly, really like understanding that it wasn't meant to be that way, but it was built to be that way. And from that point forward, I just felt like I have to do something about this. I have to go help other people wake up and break free from the chains that bind us to this system, because we're not supposed to be this way. It's totally imbalanced, and we should be more free. And so since then, and I think till the day that I die, I'm going to constantly be organizing. I'm going to constantly be advocating. It's something that I feel I was meant to do, and I should have been doing a long time ago.
Thank you so much, Jorge. I think that was a fantastic note to end on. I want to thank the San Joaquin Valley Health Fund again for a fantastic event and for allowing us to, share, our passion with your audience. And Sergio, I will turn it right back over to you. Thank you, panelists, as well. I really appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Again, thank you, Gabriela, and the panelists for the wonderful presentation that you all just shared with us. Again, the needs of our communities in the San Joaquin Valley to be connected through broadband, and to make sure that, again, we understand that we make a note, right, as Jorge said, that broadband is no longer a luxury, right? That is a necessity, and especially in this time now, where, again, we are in a digital space more often. Through the pandemic, we've been forced into a digital space, and without access to high quality broadband, again, that is a disservice to our communities and our residents in the San Joaquin Valley. I wanted to really uplift a little piece that I think I've heard across all of the presentations that we've heard today, right? Is that many of these issues we know through San Joaquin Valley Health Fund, through our residents, predated the pandemic. And the pandemic didn't create these issues. The pandemic actually exacerbated the issue, made these issues worse and more impactful in our communities. So I want to make sure that as we're thinking about this work, right, that it isn't just a recent issue that we're hearing about. These have predated the pandemic, and as we think about moving towards a new, as focusing getting back to normal, understanding that normal didn't work for a lot of residents in the San Joaquin Valley, and we are committed to not making sure that we go back to normal, that we create a new normal that really uplifts the needs of our community residents and bring our residents' voices to the table for that work as well. So I just wanted to really make that clear, as we heard many times today, that many of the issues today have predated the pandemic. So we have to understand that we also are thinking of solutions that create a new normal, so that we don't go back to the spaces that we were, that continue to underserve and underrepresent our communities.